The classroom erupted in laughter the moment Professor Harold Whitmore pointed toward the man sitting quietly in the back row and said, "You? Come up here. Maybe you can show us how someone who barely looks like a student solves this." The man slowly lifted his eyes from the notebook resting on his knees. His name was Marcus Reed, a black single father who had spent the last 6 years working night shifts, raising his 8-year-old daughter, and studying whenever exhaustion allowed him to keep his eyes open. He knew everyone was watching. He also knew the professor expected him to fail. What nobody in that room knew was that the equation written across the enormous blackboard had once been the reason Marcus stopped believing he could ever finish his education. And 3 minutes later, the laughter would disappear so completely that the silence would feel louder than any applause. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and never judging someone by their appearance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps us bring more stories about courage, dignity, and unexpected second chances. Marcus stood slowly. His old jacket had a small tear near the sleeve, and his shoes had clearly seen better days. He had come directly from work that morning after finishing an overnight shift at a downtown hotel. His hands still carried the faint smell of cleaning chemicals. He had barely slept for 2 hours before bringing his daughter, Lily, to school and rushing to campus. He was 36 years old, older than most students in the room, and unlike them, he wasn't attending college because his parents were paying tuition or because he had unlimited time to study. He was there because his daughter had once asked him a heartbreaking question, "Daddy, are you ever going to finish what you started?" That question had changed everything. Years earlier, Marcus had been a promising mathematics student. He loved numbers because numbers never judged him. 2 plus 2 was always 4, regardless of where you came from, what you wore, or how much money was in your bank account. But life had other plans. His mother became sick. His father disappeared from his life. Then Marcus became a father himself. When Lily's mother left shortly after Lily was born, Marcus made a decision that terrified him. He would raise his daughter alone. He worked wherever he could find work. Construction. Delivery driving. Warehouse shifts. Eventually, he found a steady overnight position at a hotel. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Every night, while wealthy guests slept behind expensive doors, Marcus cleaned hallways and carried luggage. During his breaks, he opened old mathematics books and studied beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the employee room. He wasn't chasing money. He was chasing the person he had once believed he could become. When Marcus reached the blackboard, Professor Whitmore handed him the chalk with a faint smile. The equation looked terrifying to most of the students. It involved multiple variables, logarithmic transformations, and a sequence of substitutions that required careful reasoning. Professor Whitmore had deliberately chosen it because he knew most students would struggle. He expected Marcus to stare at it. Maybe make a mistake. Maybe become embarrassed. Maybe walk back to his seat. Instead, Marcus looked at the equation quietly. The laughter continued for several seconds. Then Marcus started writing. His hand moved slowly at first, almost cautiously. He didn't rush. He separated the variables, simplified one section, and transformed another. A few students stopped smiling. Professor Whitmore folded his arms. Marcus continued. The room became quieter. He reached the second stage and erased one line before replacing it with a cleaner solution. Then he paused for only a moment before continuing. His mind wasn't in that classroom anymore. He was back in the hotel employee room, solving problems while his daughter slept in the chair beside him because she had been too tired to stay awake waiting for him to finish work. He remembered Lily's drawings taped above their tiny kitchen table. He remembered the nights when he couldn't afford a babysitter. He remembered studying while she colored beside him. He remembered promising her that one day she would see her father graduate. Marcus looked at the final section of the equation. Then he wrote the answer. 3 minutes had passed. Nobody laughed. Professor Whitmore stared at the board. One student quietly checked the calculation on a calculator. Another opened his textbook. The room remained frozen as the professor walked toward the blackboard. He checked the first step. Correct. The second. Correct. The substitutions. Correct. The final answer. Perfect. Professor Whitmore turned toward Marcus, and for the first time that morning, there was no amusement in his expression. There was something else. Surprise. Marcus placed the chalk down and started walking back to his seat. But before he could sit, Professor Whitmore stopped him. He asked Marcus where he had learned to solve equations like that. Marcus looked down for a moment. He explained that he had studied mathematics years ago but had never completed his degree. He said he had recently returned to college because he wanted his daughter to see that life could knock you down without having the final word. The professor said nothing. Marcus returned to his seat. Then something unexpected happened. A student near the front stood up and began clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire classroom was applauding. Marcus tried to hide his emotions, but his eyes became wet. He hadn't expected applause. He had spent years being invisible. At work, people often walked past him without looking at his face. On campus, younger students sometimes assumed he was a maintenance worker. He had become accustomed to people making judgments before learning his name. But that morning, for the first time in a long time, people weren't looking at his clothes. They were looking at what he could do. After class, Professor Whitmore asked Marcus to stay behind. Marcus expected criticism. Instead, the professor apologized. He admitted that he had intentionally called Marcus to the board because he thought the class would find the situation amusing. He said he had judged Marcus before knowing anything about him. Then Professor Whitmore asked a question that Marcus would never forget. He asked what Marcus planned to do after graduation. Marcus smiled sadly and said he wanted to become a mathematics teacher. He wanted to teach students who thought they weren't smart enough. He wanted to find children who had already decided that their circumstances had defined their future and show them that they were wrong. Professor Whitmore looked at him for several seconds before telling him that the university had a tutoring program and that he wanted Marcus to apply. Marcus couldn't believe it. Within weeks, everything began changing. He started tutoring struggling students after class. His confidence grew. Professors began noticing his ability. Students who once ignored him began asking for his help. But the most important moment came one evening when Lily visited the campus. Marcus walked her through the mathematics building, holding her little hand as they climbed the stairs. She looked at the classrooms with wide eyes. Then she saw her father's name written on a tutoring schedule. Her face lit up. She hugged him tightly and told him she knew he could do it. Marcus held his daughter close and finally allowed himself to cry. He realized that the equation on the blackboard had never really been about mathematics. It had been about judgment. It had been about assumptions. It had been about how quickly people decide what someone is capable of based on their clothes, their background, their skin color, or the mistakes they've made in the past. And Marcus had just proven something far more powerful than solving an equation. He had proven that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the person carrying the greatest untold story. 2 years later, Marcus graduated with honors. Lily sat in the front row wearing a little dress she had chosen herself. When Marcus walked across the stage, she stood and cheered louder than anyone else. Professor Whitmore was there too. When Marcus received his diploma, the professor stood and applauded. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the professor anymore. He was thinking about the exhausted man who once studied in a hotel break room. The father who had nearly given up. The child who had asked him to finish what he started. And the dream that had survived every difficult night. If this story touched your heart, Please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that their circumstances do not define their future, and subscribe to Kindness Corner for more inspiring stories. And before we end, I have one special request. Comment, "I believe in second chances," if you believe everyone deserves an opportunity to prove who they really are. Because Marcus learned something that day that none of the equations could ever teach: never laugh at someone simply because you don't know their story. The person you underestimate today may become the person who inspires you tomorrow.